Welcome to Lee Anderson's Real World. Tonight I'm delighted to be joined by the very lovely Emma Webb, soon to be married Emma Webb, and we've got two left in the corners this week. I'm very fortunate my old friend, one of my best friends in politics, Matthew Stadlen, political commentator, and former Labour MP Bill Rammell, he's back. Both lefties in the corner. Straight to it today, guys. We've seen some horrific scenes this week over the pond with Donald Trump, an assassination attempt. I keep looking at it over and over again, and I saw some 3D graphics last night where you could actually see the trajectory of the bullets travelling towards him and how his head tilted at the very last millisecond. If it had not tilted his head, he'd have been dead now. Matthew, what's the world coming to?
No, it was an appalling event and should be universally and totally condemned by everyone, no matter what your politics.
Yeah. Emma?
Unfortunately, it hasn't seemed to have been as forthrightly condemned by some people on the left. I think that the reaction, of course, there have been some people who have come out and condemned it, but there have been some people who I think have reacted in a way that they wouldn't have reacted if it had been somebody that they agreed with who had just faced an assassination attempt. I mean, there was one commentator who was even mocking the man who was in the audience who'd been shot. So I think a lot of people have said that as you mentioned, that footage where they actually map with maybe they're using AI or something to map the moment that he turns his head, and you can see just how much this sort of was on a knife edge. That many people have been saying that they think that America has just narrowly avoided civil war. And it's what, for me, I think really is possibly not being discussed as much is, yes, the assassination attempt is a threat to democracy, and a lot of the people who are not being as outspoken against it are the same people who would jibber-jabber about insurrection.
Yeah,
but on the other hand, you also, I think an important aspect of this for America is that it's already been the case that if you go to a Trump rally, you might have your livelihood destroyed. But now if you go to a Trump rally, you might be having to put your life on the line. And I think that has an extraordinarily profound effect.
Let me just bring Bill in, because Bill's one to chip it. Bill, you've travelled the world as a minister, as a member of Parliament. Did you ever feel in danger in different parts of the world?
I mean, going to places like Iraq and Afghanistan, you had protection officers with you. And actually, that's one, I think this was shocking, outrageous, and I don't think any figure on the left in this country has not condemned it. But I think there's some serious questions for the American security services.
Yeah.
I mean, I heard that story, that they weren't on the roof where the guy was shooting from because it had a slope, and they'd be at risk. For God's sake, the security services are supposed to...
But Bill, you know a little bit about this. Where were the drones, the helicopters and machinery like that? Why wasn't they there?
I think there are all sorts of legitimate questions. I think there's going to be an investigation on the Hill, and I think the director of the security services, her tenure is at risk.
It was a spectacular failure, of course it was. I'd just like to come back, if I may, to one or two of the things that Emma said. More than one thing can be true at the same time. And it's absolutely true that that assassination attempt was a threat to democracy, and America came within millimetres, and as Emma said, a turn of the head from a very, very serious situation, potentially. And also Donald Trump came very, very close to losing his life, which would have been absolutely horrific. It is also true at the same time, because we are in the middle of a very important election campaign, presidential election campaign in America, that some of the things that Donald Trump has said in the past are also threatening to democracy. And I'll give you two very quick examples. One was encouraging his supporters to march on the Capitol, which preceded the appalling scenes that I'm sure you would condemn, Lee, the insurrection of January the 6th. Yeah. And the second was, and this is bound up with the first, was to reject the democratic process when he lost to Biden last time. That is a clear and present danger to democracy.
Okay.
And let me just quickly finish. I just quickly finish, because I want to compare... Let me compare it to what's...
Emma, I want to come to you now. It seems that Matthew is sort of justifying this action by their comments. That's what it sounds like to me.
No, not in the slightest. That's not what I said, Lee. I said two things could be true at the same time.
You've had to say, Matthew.
I don't think he's justifying it, but I do think that he's missing the point, because the point is about hypocrisy, and it's about the way that the left have one rule for themselves and one rule for others. And particularly when you've had people comparing Donald Trump to Hitler and his followers to Nazis, of course, you can, I'm not saying that, I'm effectively just trying to point out that on the left, they would regard that
let's
as
just
being
clear that up.
incitement.
So I'm going to bring Bill in now, Emma, because it was David Lammy you're talking about. He described Trump as a woman-hating, neo-Nazi, sympathising sociopath. He's also a profound threat to the international order. Is this the sort of language you would have used, Bill, when you was working over in that place?
No, and but there's all sorts of people who've made legitimate criticisms of Donald Trump, and I think it is true that what happened, the attempt on his life, was appalling. But at the same time, he is a threat to democracy, and he'd be a threat to world stability. His views on NATO, his views about Ukraine, I think are very dangerous. So I think he needs to be defeated in the election. It pains me to say it, for that to happen, Joe Biden needs to stand down as the candidate. I've always been a fan of Joe's, but what the debate and recent weeks have exposed, he's vulnerable, he's frail. We need a better candidate up against Trump.
Matthew.
Just to come back in, first, let's be completely clear. I didn't come anywhere close to justifying the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. I've decried it immediately. The first thing I said on this show is absolutely outrageous. Anyone who equivocates about that is part of the problem. So that's the first thing. I would never describe Donald Trump in the terms that his own running mate, J.D. Vance, is alleged to have described him. J.D. Vance said in a message to a friend, allegedly, that he oscillated between thinking that Trump was some sort of necessary figure and potentially America's Hitler. Now, that is not language I would ever use about Donald Trump. What I would say and what I would repeat is that what he said in the process of denying the election result when he lost to Biden was threatening to democracy. And I think the way in which your former colleagues, many of your former colleagues in the Tory party, handed over power after their humiliating defeat at the hands of Labour's landslide was an excellent example of how democracy should be done. They did it with dignity. And I would praise Rishi Sunak, your former boss, and other senior Tories for the way they did that. And that is a lesson to America.
Fair point, Emma?
I think Trump has been demonised, broadly speaking. I don't mean by Matthew. And I also think that what J.D. Vance says in a private text message to a friend when he's trying to work out his views about a particular prominent political figure is by the by. The fact that J.D. Vance has chosen to run as his vice president candidate shows that he obviously doesn't think that about Donald Trump. So I think that's a sort of slightly ludicrous point to make. That's not the same as David Lammy's comments, because the point is that it's about the culture on which a democracy needs to rest. And the reality is that in the States, and also to a degree in the United Kingdom, the rug is being pulled out from underneath democracy because the culture that supports it is being eroded, and it's being eroded by those people who demonise their opponents, not as being wrong, but as being evil.
Okay. Let me just fast forward a year when Lammy made these comments. A year later, he called Trump a serial liar and a cheat who was also deluded, dishonest, xenophobic, narcissistic, and no friend of Britain. Is this the language of a foreign secretary?
He wasn't foreign secretary at the time, but all those comments are accurate about Donald Trump. And, I hear Emma saying that Trump has been demonised. He's demonised himself. This is a guy who, despite losing, 20 different legal cases about the veracity of the election result, still tried to overturn it. That's the stuff of banana republics. And that's what we'll have again if Trump comes back to power.
Lee, I just want to make a quick point, if I may, right? Because as I've been absolutely clear all the way through, what happened to Trump was a disgrace. It was an act of evil. We don't know what the motives are, but what that man did, by the way, in taking another life as well, was an act of evil of that shooter. Let's rewind a little bit, because you're rewinding to David Lammy. What did Trump say after the husband of Nancy Pelosi was brutally attacked in their own home? It could have died. What did he say? He mocked him. He said, let me say what he said. He said, "How's her husband? How's he doing, by the way?" That is a sick remark. Donald Trump says the most appalling things. And in my very strong opinion, and it matters not a jot because I don't have a vote, but you're asking my opinion, it would be a terrible mistake for the American people to re-elect him.
So we a lot of whataboutery here, Emma.
Well, you can accuse Donald Trump of hypocrisy too. That's fine. You can criticise Donald Trump, but I think if you're going to talk about a banana republic, the kind of Matthew said we don't know what his motivations are. Well, we know enough. We know his motivations were to assassinate a president, and a country where political candidates, people as prominent as Donald Trump, are threatened with assassination, and also that those who go to their rallies not only may have their livelihoods destroyed if they're photographed there, but also might lose their lives. I think that that is very, very serious, and I think that criticisms of Donald Trump, fine, but it pales in comparison to the seriousness of this.
But you know what, Emma? I'm 64, and I've never seen an election in this country where either Labour or Conservative have challenged the veracity of the result. That's what happened with Donald Trump, and that's the risk he
Apart from
presents.
the referendum result of 2016, where they wanted
People
a second.
challenged it.
People
Some
accepted
people,
it.
not me included, thought there should be another vote because that was their way. That's their way of doing democracy. Why should it be a binding vote forever? I wasn't on that side. I thought we should listen to the people and that we should get on with it. That's very different. Let's be crystal clear about this. From Donald Trump saying that he was robbed of that election. That was
fine,
a
but
very,
the
very dangerous thing to do.
Fine, but there were Democrats also when Donald Trump won who felt that the election had been stolen somehow. And we're talking about things like Russian collusion, the same thing with Brexit. So it's fine to criticise Trump, but the Democrats also, when Donald Trump won, claimed that the election had been, some of the prominent Democrats claimed the election had been stolen. They claimed that it was Russian collusion. The same thing here with Brexit. So, it's not exactly the same thing in the UK as it is in the US. And I think it's a mistake to try and project their politics onto our own. But we do see some shadows of that here. But I think, again, Matthew's point is entirely besides the point. I think it's just detracting from the very seriousness, the seriousness of what's happened in the States.
Right, yeah.